we know that Commissioner Pichek will be a little bit late. But we are here. So I think that, does anybody have any reflections on the last meeting? What, any thoughts, concerns? Yeah. And
I think it was helpful as we were going through that. Andrew Emmerich. It was really helpful to go through the options document together and just kind of, look at it at a surface view right now, just to figure out some pieces. We were able to all find that common agreement on not impacting current retirees. So I think that was really helpful just to start to move some of the conversations. So that was great.
good, thank you. Anybody else have any reflections on the last meeting or thoughts or concerns or? Well, I guess then we'll jump to, so I'm not sure what's going on with the screen, Gail. We still see.
Yes, I understand. And
Oh, okay, all right.
I'll that, I'll be-
Okay, I just wasn't sure.
Right, as soon as I-
Yep,
Colin, would you mind swinging that door up for us so that we don't get too much hallway noise?
so with no other comments or concerns from the last meeting, I think that, wait, I'm gonna wait and see if Eric had any follow-up comments.
Let's do that.
Yes, we will.
Thank you. I appreciate that opportunity.
Yes. And not necessarily on the details of what was sent out, but just on the meeting itself, reflections on.
Yeah, thank you, and I'll do this just from memory here without getting my stuff out, so for efficiency's sake. I guess being able to look at some of the work the actuary did in terms of one-time revenue, one-time funds and dedicated revenue. I had a couple takeaways. One being the one-time funds, no matter the amount or the allocation, they essentially provide 100% return over the original investment over the course of the amortization schedule. So I think that shows that it's a good investment, and it in of itself creates space in the budget to allocate funds on a recurring basis over and above the ADEC. And I know there can be a tension amongst, there's a lot of competing uses for state dollars, and that dedicated revenue analysis, I think, makes the argument as to why it's a good place to invest additional recurring revenue. You see the delta between the different scenarios and the current projection of costs. That delta can all be spent on other priorities. So, when that tension comes up, I think that analysis makes a compelling case for why it's a good investment.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Did you get a packet of the handouts?
I did not, but I think I have them electronically.
Oh,
so
okay. Oh, yeah, you do.
I can get them later.
Okay, should we move on?
I think it's, yeah, I think probably we should invite Chris Roop to come up and
Help us with it. So if you look at the handout that has the green on it, I sent that out earlier, and the green is where I think we landed. And what we thought we would do is start at the bottom of page 2. That's where we left off last time, go through the rest of them and then come back and get into more detail on them. Does that make sense to everybody?
Do you need a new document or the one from the week before?
No, I sent out a document on Monday, and it's,
I just wondered which one.
yeah. So we ended on charge more for service credit purchases. That's where we did not discuss that. So that's where we will start, and then do the same thing on the reduce liabilities section, and then get some understandings of where we are on those like we did last time, and then start going through the ones where there were continuing questions in more detail. Does that make sense to everybody? Okay. All right, so let's start with that. Charge more for service credit purchases. And Andrew, I believe that actually came from you.
That one, that I don't actually
Okay.
think came from me.
I don't remember where.
Yeah, that's so part of, and maybe you're thinking of, I've mentioned before of being able to possibly opt in to pay more early in return for service credit. I actually had questions about the charge more for service credits, just trying to figure out that is calculated yearly by actuaries. It's not a fixed rate, it's calculated out.
Yeah,
Yeah, Chris Roop, Joint Fiscal Office. I would look to the Treasurer's Office to sort of color in the lines, but my understanding is that, whenever the price to purchase years of service is computed, it's based on a variety of actuarial factors. And the intent is really to make sure that the member is paying for the assumed cost of those extra years with the, with the sort of overall condition that we put on everything, that it's based on the assumptions that are in place at the time. So I think the intent behind this suggestion is, does it make sense to continue that practice where people are paying sort of an actuarial equivalent based on the assumptions in place at the time, or charge some premium above that cost that could account for the fact that there's always going to be some risk moving forward, whether or not your assumptions are met and whether or not assumptions change in the future. So I think this kind of gets to a question of, to what extent should the system incentivize people to purchase years of service that they didn't necessarily perform their duties?
And so are the calculations then based off from the 2008 assumptions that were used by actuaries for the amortization schedule?
Well, the assumptions were put in place, were just revised last September.
Okay.
So it'd be the demographic and economic assumptions that go into the normal cost.
I think what the point comes down to is, when is the purchase made? For many people, they can't purchase years of service until they have 25 years of service. And frequently we have people that, whether they have 25, 26, 27, they come in like several months right before they're going to plan to retire, and they make that purchase right then and there. So it's based on the actuarial assumptions that are in place at that time. So in that respect, it probably is cost neutral to the system, because they're not continuing to work, some more years after they initiate the purchase. We have other cases where purchases are made a little earlier, but I think the bulk of them come, when somebody's planning on retiring, let's say January 1st, they come into our office now. They say, I'm planning on January 1st, I have 25, 26, 27 years of service. I'm going to purchase the balance to get to 30. We provide we run the calculations, we provide the cost, they pay it, goes into the funds, they retire January 1st.
I just had a point of clarification, Molly Stoner. It's not necessarily service that they didn't provide, because it can also be that you're purchasing years. For example, I did 6 years in a private school. So though I'm starting my 30th year right now, I'm at 23 something in the state system, but I could purchase those private school years, as could people who have had military service and any number of other things. So it could have actually been service, just not to the state system.
That's a great point. And you're absolutely right. And a lot of systems out there do allow people to purchase things like military service and things like that.
Yeah.
What I was trying to say is that you're purchasing service that you may not have performed in your current position.
Exactly.
so where are we with that? I don't have a strong feeling on it.
Yeah, no, I don't, I guess to me, it would be, if we're gonna, I guess the point on this one for me would be, if we trust the actuaries with all of the other stuff that we trust them with, why wouldn't we trust them with this, them saying, this is what it's gonna cost you? And that's, if we said, you said that, but we think we should pay more because we don't think you, because to me, it just kind of doesn't make much sense. If we're gonna trust them with all of that, it seems like we should trust them with that number too. And if that's what they say, because it's not a static number, it's gonna change every year or every few years, or whenever I go to purchase it or someone else goes to purchase it. So that's just my opinion.
Any other thoughts on this?
Question I have, just I think of like travel rural and up where I am, like I could see a teacher starting their career in New York and then moving to a school in Vermont. Would that similar, like if you invest in New York, you can't bring that money over. They start over, you know, they may keep top 4 years in Rouse's Point and now keep Albert. Is there a way for them to buy in? How does it work now if they just don't get the credit?
They can buy in if they choose.
They can.
And might it also be somewhat, like, some states might allow money to roll over directly? I don't know if they're different. Do you know?
Right, so it's different. Most states or retirement systems will allow them to roll that money directly over to Vermont retirement systems. And in some cases, based on how much they have in their account in another state or how that retirement system is set up, it may not be a year for year transfer. It's still based on the actuarial assumptions and calculations in Vermont. So somebody, for example, just making this up, if they had $50,000 in a retirement account someplace else, and that's was associated with 7 years of service, let's say, based on the calculations in Vermont, it might only buy them 5 years in Vermont. It all depends. So it's not a 1-for-1 transfer from a service credit perspective.
John.
So I think this is a question for Michael. Has the treasurer's office ever done an analysis of whether, service credit purchases are neutral to the pension or actually the pension?
Well, at the time they're made, they're based on the actuarial assumptions in place at the time. And so whenever the assumption is changed, the factors that we use for the calculations are changed.
Right. But we've had significant changes in our assumptions.
That's correct. And so the factors have changed as a result of those.
Can I just give an example? Just because the private school years that I did, when I looked as I left private school, which was 2003, it was going to cost me about $9,000 a year to buy those 6 years. Right now, those years would cost me $18,001. So it goes up as as the value increases and as you near retirement, because you have to pay more to get what you would get for it sooner, if that makes sense. I don't know if the language I'm using works, but that's just an example.
I mean, the discussion, I think we've got to protect that because I think just from a recruiting perspective and generation, I just think of a lot of kids I went to college with did Teach for America. They did other things and they may have started their career doing something very, admirable, but they didn't want to do that their entire lives. So can we take that experience, bring them into Vermont and almost make it a benefit for them to want to come here to transfer those benefits. I'm supportive of buying the years and figuring that piece out.
So my question is, if we do this now and it's figured out that yearly, the actuaries figured out, do we need to address this here? Is it going to make a huge difference in our goal here in what we have to do? Or do we just leave this one alone because it's already happening? That's just the question I have of whether we need to do anything or not. Thanks.
Microphone.
You're on the charge more for service credit.
Yeah.
Yeah, service credit purchases. So, I think the only thought I have there is, the actuarial value at the time certainly is like the fair price, but there's a risk, I guess, on both sides, right? There's a risk to the state that we're going to miss it. There's a risk that maybe you'll miss it on the other side for the employee. But you almost want to think about the actuarial value plus 15% or plus 10% or something that's a buffer in case you're missing that in future years to a significant degree. It's just something I think we should think about, because it adds a risk to the fund when you put the actual value at a certain point.
Thank you, Mike. I think you may have missed my comment I made earlier before you walked in the door, but the comment I made was depending upon the time when the purchase is made, for example, Molly mentioned out-of-state service, or for example, I'll just use myself as an example. I worked for the state of Iowa for a couple of years. I was in the Peace Corps for 2 years. Those are the types of service that can be purchased before you have 25 years of service. So depending upon when those purchases are made, they're made at the time with the actual assumptions that are in place at the time, but depending upon when you actually retire, it could have an impact. In many cases, we have people come into our office with more than 25 years of service, and they want to purchase the remaining time to retire in 3 to 6 months, for example. So from that perspective, for that individual, I think it is actually cost neutral to the system because they're not going to continue to work. Their salary is not going to go up. The cost to the individual at the time is relationship to where the system is from an assumption perspective. But I believe, and we can check with the actuary, I believe that in the cases of where purchases are made, earlier in one's career, that is probably the case where because someone is likely to have a salary increase throughout their years, that maybe it's not as cost neutral as it could or should be.
Yeah, exactly. I think that even if you're buying like 5 years of service credit, it's harder the longer period of time, there's just more uncertainty, more risk. But yeah, if you're coming in for a year or a few months, and then I think you can probably hit the target pretty closely.
You want to? I think that.
Grab a mic.
Oh.
Sorry, y'all, just a reminder that we have to help each other out here with the mics moving back and forth.
Good to get more.
Michael and Mike's.
Yeah. Not enough mics.
Grab a mic.
Corey, Mike.
I just wanted to say, and I think it was a great thing that Michael said about that. Because I deal with, in corrections, there are some who do purchase their service credits, but it is not usually like, oh, I'm getting out 5 years early. No, but they're looking at a couple of months or a year. So I'm just putting out, in the opinion of that is, I do not want to change what the actuarial value of what we're doing right now with service credits. I think it should remain the same.
So just flagging that what I think I heard is an agreement that service credits that are purchased at or very close to retirement are likely fairly certain to be cost neutral, but that service credits that are purchased early in one's tenure as a teacher or a state employee have more uncertainty. Yes. Okay. So I think we should flag this as an issue to continue to consider. Whether that, as Commissioner Pichuk suggested, there should be something done to account for the uncertainty of service credits that are purchased well in advance of someone's expected retirement age.
Yeah, I thought I heard Mike also say that it could be a risk both to the fund itself and to the employee. So if you put a surcharge on, you're accounting for the risk to the fund and the employer, but you're not accounting for the risk that the employee might be taking. So I don't know how you would account for that.
Would they get that money back? So let's say that, oh, actually things remain not the same, but on that premium they paid, do they get that back then as they're down that road? That's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
For that service credit thing.
Yeah.
And I think also the system is sort of structured to account for that. Sorry, Molly Stoner. The system is sort of structured right now, if I'm right, Mike, to account for that already, because you can only purchase service years prior to the 5 years before your retirement. So you have to have 25 years into the system in order to just buy time for time's sake. And I think, as Corey was saying earlier, I'm the values girl, right? If we go back to people having value for our educational system who have served in the military, served in the Peace Corps, served in private schools and developed themselves and are bringing those skills with them to their jobs, then the risk we take on for their value to us is like it is for any teacher having, or any state employee having background experiences. And really the last 5 years are the only ones where people can purchase just for the sake of purchasing because they're near retirement and they really feel done. And that's a cost neutral situation already. So in a way, it's already accounted for, I believe.
Yeah, I had a similar question to John, wondering if there had been any analysis, maybe looking at the years that were purchased further out in time. But I have another question that is, what other kind of models exist? Because I mean, going off the actuarial value, it does strike me as the kind of the best, most informed way to look at it, but I don't know if there are other ways to sort of account for that risk factor.
Have to admit, I'm a little confused here about something. Molly, you said you can only purchase them within 5 years of retirement.
Wait, let me clarify. If you want to buy years that you served in one of the areas that can be purchased, you can do that at any time. But to buy time just for time's sake, you
Oh,
can
I
only
see.
do after 25 years.
I see, got it. Thank you. Okay, so we're gonna flag this one just to see if there's any more information we need. All right, so moving on to reduce liabilities.
Could I add one more comment before we leave increased assets?
Sure, you can.
Well, I thought Dan Doonan put forth a strategy at our last meeting that would fit in this category, and that was the example of Colorado public employees, non-career participants being able to leave the assets in the plan. And we've talked about, the changing workforce and that maybe all employees aren't career employees and different ways to meet their retirement needs. And that seemed like a really compelling strategy in that it supplements the it's aid to the existing DB system. I mean, it's similar to pension obligation bonds in the fact that it's kind of an arbitrage strategy, but it doesn't have any timing risk, and it potentially provides a better benefit to the employee that has left state service. So it seems like potentially one of those win-win-win options that I think we should. I was not familiar with that, and I was intrigued by Dan's presentation. I think it's something we should keep on our radar.
Yeah, I agreed. I thought it was a very interesting approach. So we'll add that.
I had one other thought about the increased assets. Currently, the kind of historic academies that we have in Vermont, St. J, Linden, Burton, those teachers are part of the Beasters pension system, correct? If there are in the future other private schools that are getting public dollars, adding something that those schools who are getting those vouchers are having licensed teachers required to be part of our system, getting more people in our system would be a way to help increase assets. I don't think that's something we've talked about.
So I think that those are the only ones that are considered public schools for the purpose of their students. Other schools, Vermont Academy, for example, gets Westminster kids can, I believe, still go to Vermont Academy on a voucher, but you might have one kid there for 4 years and then not another kid there for a number of years. So they're only getting public dollars or a voucher for that one kid for that period of time. So I'm not sure how you force any of those teachers.
Right.
But
I think like St. J, I think it was BFA where I went to high school.
Yep.
It's actually private. I'm the first class in all 4 years in public school, but it was still publicly funded. The public couldn't vote the budget. So it was just, they set the budget and tax rate, and because we have this weird, for almost 100 years, that's the way it worked. And eventually went public, but I don't think anyone ever considered it not the public high school. I think St. John's Academy, probably River, probably similar.
And there's 5 of them.
Yeah, I don't know.
I can't remember the other one. One of them is around here someplace, and it's Saint something. No, it's in Thetford. Thetford Academy.
Thetford
Oh,
Academy.
yes, Thetford Academy.
Burton.
Yeah, Burton. There's 5 of them, and they are the public school for their.
And Madam Chair, if I may, while it's true that if you have more members in, that paying contributions in, that does increase the assets. It also does increase the liability side of the equation too. So it's not just one side versus the other.
All right, can we move to reduce liabilities and start going through them? All right. So the first whole set here is around the COLA. Have been a lot of options, probably more that I didn't capture, that addressed COLA. So should we just start walking through them? And if you have, you can see the red here are Chris's notes that let us know where some actuarial work has been done on these. So if we decide that that's an area we want to go forward in, we've got some information already. So we want to start with number one. Is that how we should do it? Just
Yeah, I think so. And then Chris, to the extent that as we move to different categories, you think it would be helpful to sort of give us a refresher or explain the dynamics at play here. I think that would be really helpful. We have talked some about COLAs and adjustments to the COLA in the past. So I think it would be helpful to go through each bullet point in this section.
And if, Madam Chair, if I may, I think one reason why there's as many options listed here for the COLA is an area of significant risk to both systems. It's very difficult to predict what inflation trends are going to look like 10, 20, 30 years in the future. And we've been fortunate up to this point that inflation really since 2009 has not been as high as we expected it to be. That is no longer the case in the present time. So COLAs are an area of not only significant actuarial risk, but they're also an area where modifications to the COLA can move the numbers pretty significantly when you're looking at the ADAC and the liabilities.
And I will just remind us that a few years ago, I don't remember when exactly it was, we had I don't know if we had a negative cost of living adjustment, and we actually passed legislation that guarantees 1% COLA, even if there's a negative for if the cost of living has actually decreased. So people right now are guaranteed that 1%, even if there's a loss.
Yeah, the benefit amount does not go down if there's a negative CPI. That's
Yeah,
correct.
if there's negative CPI, that's the word I'm looking for. Yes. Okay, so do we want to looking at these?
Well, I'm against removing all COLAs, but I think we can have a discussion. I wouldn't mind one around the progressivity of, a certain amount. I'm looking at maybe cap, like Social Security requirement about 6%. We want to allow that kind of a jump. Is that clear?
We're capped at 5.
And I don't think that says remove all COLAs. It's all
No,
automatic.
automatic, but I think you need to have something in there for people live a lot longer down retirement. 30 years is a long time to have that compound growth. We get some liability to our system, but provide that income security. Just clarifying, for teachers, we only currently get 50% of CPI, correct?
Yeah, these two sheets that the treasurer's office put together, which are really handy resources that I know Gail has on the website, show you all the different COLA rules for the different plans, but you're correct, the teacher plan. It's a 50% CPI up to a maximum 5.
So when you say, just to clarify that, when you say a cap at 5% for the leasers, does that mean a 10% CPI, or does that mean 5%? So 2.5 is really our cap. You see what I'm saying?
I believe it is the benefit cannot increase by more than 5%.
So that would be a 10% COLA or CPI. Okay. Yeah, right. Well,
Let's hope that doesn't happen anytime
No, I
soon.
mean, when was the last time? In my lifetime, it was there at some point. It was 13. Something. I don't know.
So Yeah, Eric.
Yeah, I just want to pick up on what Corey said in terms of remove all automatic COLAs. You know, I feel strongly that really can't be an option either. You know, pensions are designed to provide retirement benefit throughout someone's life, and removing all automatic COLAs, you know, definitely impairs that to a significant degree. And the automatic, you know, we just had some conversation about, you know, it being automatic, and I'd suggest that having some formula is a better way to do it than having it sort of be an arbitrary decision. It gives people some ability to plan in a more predictable manner. So, yeah, I suggest we strike that.
Anybody else have thoughts on striking that one?
I mean, yes, straight.
Yes means no. No means yes.
So the next two really are kind of related. One is more definitive, it stops at a certain point, and one is kind of tiered, I think, the way I read them. So that you would be, and I think at one point, it had been suggested that like 24,000 is the average median retirement amount, and that anything above there not have a COLA on it. But then the second part, the second bullet there is that it's progressive. So you might have certain COLA on up to 24 and then up to 34 and then so thoughts on that?
So
Rose?
cliff or progressive tapering, I think
Yeah,
is the difference between the two.
yeah, that is.
I support that getting modeled to see what it looks like. I think understanding what that is. The other piece too that I've been thinking about in this one is we talked about the 24,000 number. That's probably the current retirees, right? Not current people working in. So I guess my only piece is we do something like this. If we set the floor at 24 now, everyone's working now. Their benefit may be well above that. So that number, I think, still has to play in it for us to find where like the first, like, you know, we start to scale back and forward. But I think it makes sense that as your higher level change might give us progressive dollars.
Yeah, and I think it makes sense to think about, you know, we talked before about at what point are we just moving dollars around? So if we're getting rid of COLA, that's going to fit retirees under other poverty levels where they'll be able to qualify for food stamps and things like that. We don't want to be doing that. So I think as those numbers change, we need to have a graduated potential.
One other question I have on it's related to this, maybe other, but I think she got on the sheet. We tax our pensions, right? Should we, if we're going to adjust some of these COLAs, I think it's talk about not taxing pensions. That's also a way to give the employees some of that money back in their pocket.
Yeah.
That if we're going to cut the benefit a little bit, that we can go back and say, okay, the benefit might be down, we're not paying this 5% tax every year, so you get that or whatever it is where your income lines, that comes back into your income. But I know that we talked military pensions, we talked others, but I think a real serious thing we need to talk about is taxing pensions, public pensions in general. This seems to be counterproductive.
I'm not sure that could you do even not taxing public pensions? My area, we have a lot of retirees who have a lot of money and they come from out of state and pensions. I don't want to forego that income from those pensions.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a broad discussion, but I think that's also a way for us to, as we look at the benefit shift, that we can pay for it on another end. You know, there.
Just add another consideration as we're into the threshold or progressive conversation on COLA is if we are asked, if we do something progressive on the contribution side, it might be tough to ask people to pay in more that are then going to get less. So just something to keep in mind as we consider the options available on each side.
Michael, I just want to clarify, I believe the average pension on the teacher system as of the last valuation was approximately 21,500. Just to put that out there as what it currently is.
Yeah, and the state system is slightly below that, I believe. And I think the 24,000 number spoke to people who retired recently. Because the more recent you retire, the higher your average benefit will be because of salary growth and things of that nature.
Right, and we'll have the new numbers at the end of October for the most recent valuation.
Just clarification. So I believe it was Graham who told us that people in Vermont who collect their pension aren't leaving. I think he said it was something like 76% of people are staying here in Vermont who have their pension. But those people who do leave, if they go to a state that doesn't tax pensions, Vermont's not getting anything from them, right? We're paying out their benefit, but they're not paying tax to Vermont. Is that correct? So it's just another kind of thought of with Corey's piece about, eliminating that tax, where again, encouraging people to stay in Vermont and putting those dollars back into the economy here, and putting it back into helping out all Vermonters. So just a thought.
So I like the idea of a progressive. Oh, I do like that idea. How it, I'm not exactly sure where the tiers are, but I personally like that.
I guess if we, if we went that, for me personally, I think it would be, I want to say, it is a concern. I'm just concerned that if we use 21,000, 24,000, whatever number, I'm not sure that captures career employees. I think that number, I think that's my concern. A 30-year employee is much different than someone who works for 6 years and then goes away and goes. So that would be my concern. If there's a way we could see what the average pension of a career employee was, and let's look at that number. For me, I think that would sit a little bit better. At least we could have a better gauge of what that looks like in terms of amounts.
And I don't know if you could do it as opposed to 24,000 or 30,000 or whatever you do. If you could do it on the first such percent of the pension gets a COLA of this, and the next percentage. So it does take into account the
Career employees.
Yeah.
Yeah, for me personally, I think if you do that, I think you can take, people who give 30 years or plus years,
Yeah.
we don't want to start taking away from them because someone else skewed the number a little bit. somewhere.
exactly, yeah. But that can be done.
Yeah, I think Dan raises a good point. I mean, it'd be good to get a little more data on how much the average pension payout is, not just the average, what's the median. If we can get a little data of what groups, pension amounts go into to see how we're impacting people, I think that would be helpful, especially if it's easily available, because I think
So you
it's
mean breaking it down from, because right now we have a thing that just says these surgeons, these.
right. Just the average doesn't tell you very much. I think that's Dan's point, is it doesn't capture, employees that work their entire careers for the state or as a teacher. And I think that's important to distinguish those people from other people. So it would be good. And an average is a weird number. It would be good to get the median too. I mean, and just have a little more data. I think progressivity is a great idea, but I think as we start down that path, we need a little more information.
Okay, so yeah.
I was agree with Dan. I had similar thought. I didn't know what our someone that has to work in the system for a long time, other retirement. So someone that has worked in the system for a long time, maybe less. I agree with that point. I think of course we'll do that both of those on the threshold of the progressive work.
So it looks like we have some agreement around doing some more defining of what scenarios we might want to ask the actuary to cost out and informing that with some more precise data around what pension benefits are typical for the different groups.
So can they look at, because this would be so individual. Can they look at this, what I was talking about, is like the first 20% of your pension gets this COLA and the next 20% gets, is that something can even be done, or do we just look at the more general information and then?
Yeah, so I think the actuaries can do a lot of modeling, but the more caveats and complexity
Yeah.
we put around it, the less precise the model's gonna be.
Okay.
And the harder it's gonna be to really drill down, I think. But, everything's sort of a snapshot in time based on the assumptions for the future.
But if we get more information on the categories, that would give it. Okay.
So the next one is suggests a flat cap, capping COLAs at 2%.
And now we're capped at 5.
Correct.
Eric, it looks like you're.
Yeah, I don't support this as written, but I would, I think for modeling purposes, looking at the actuarial impact of taking the floor down to 0 from 1% and, maybe 5% max to 4%. Looking at different ways to structure something like this, I would be open to at least looking at modeling for and I think the 1% floor was put in during a different time in terms of inflation. That might be something that may have an actuarial impact, but might not actually have a impact to beneficiaries in this environment. So I think that's worth taking a look at.
Great. All right, so risk sharing. Any thoughts on any of those, or risk sharing in general on the COLA?
I think it's worth looking at some point. I don't know how we structure, but I think risk sharing and all of this could be something we have to address. But I guess the point I'm looking at it too is like if we make changes, and we make revenue changes, and we do the one-time money, say we're a little more conservative this time, but for some reason beat everything pretty good. Like, is there a way to build? I guess I look at risk sharing that too. Is there a way to get it back? You know what I mean, for the employee. So I think it's I don't think I just don't think we should not cross it off the list. I think I don't have an idea around it, but I think it's interesting because I think employees really want their COLA. I know they do, and I think they're also feeling like this year, like they got to chip an extra quarter point or something to keep it. Like, why wouldn't they? I just think I wouldn't want to cross it off. I don't have an idea around it, but I think we should leave it as our discussions continue to unfold.
Have your thoughts on that?
I go back and forth about whether risk sharing on employers value, but should we think about some sort of risk sharing, whether it's this or some other components on like a new plan for new employees, or should we apply it to current employees? I keep going back and forth on that. But the concept of risk sharing, like that it sort of automatically resets so that you don't sort of get to a position of 10 years down the road and you're really in a bind again, but that it sort of helps automatically reset and you don't have to have, you have the agreement and you don't have to have the discussion every few years if you're, sort of realigns you back on the trajectory that you need to be on for it to be healthy and sustainable, the pension fund. So the concept is good. It's just, I don't know, like Corey, I don't have a particular thought about where it should be applied or to whom it should be applied.
Well, I think I might not have understood that totally, but I think that's the third bullet point under there. mean, if the fund is at this level, then there might be less of a COLA, but then it gets reset if the fund actually grows and is healthier at that point.
And then if it gets off track again, those things.
Yeah, yeah.
So discussion on this concept, it seems to me that the first and third sub bullet, the blank circles are sort of tied to the health of the fund, and that the second and fourth are tied more to the assumptions upon which we're making predictions of where the fund is going. Is that correct, Chris?
Yeah, I would say the second and fourth, yeah, it has to do with the experience deviating from assumptions. But yes, I agree with what you said.
So do we, do we want to look at this risk sharing concept based on the overall health of the funds, or do we want to look at it based on the experience assumptions that are being made about the funds? Dan?
I think my preference would be to go with 1 and 3. Those are solid, the fund is at X%. We know it's good. To me, if we're going to base it on assumptions, that's, it's kind of out of our hands in that sense. We can say, if our fund reaches this number, we believe that's a good threat. So I would prefer 1 and 3 as opposed to 2 and 4 personally. For me,
You can miss your assumption.
sure, absolutely.
If our assumption is 7% average, which means that theoretically you're gonna miss it half the time.
Sure, exactly. Yeah,
Yeah.
You
exactly.
would hope so.
Let's go with the real numbers instead of the funny numbers.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
agree.
The funded ratio does sort of roll up all those impacts too, of all those different little experience factors that, aggregated together drive that funded ratio. So that's like one kind of prominent number that you can point to.
Sure.
That people can get their head around that sometimes more than they can about whether CPI fell above or below the assumption.
Yeah,
And it takes all that into account.
Correct, yeah.
So should we cross off 2 and 4? Is that what we're saying?
Yep, I did.
Okay. For one, below X% funded, I guess my concern with that is that's going to be probably for a continuous period, which that might be hard for retirees to manage. And you could have good years in that period where there'll be a significant impact. So I don't know, I'm more favorable looking at it on kind of an annual basis. But the other thing I would say is the way the provisions are captured here, it says no COLA. And I don't think that's the only option. I think in Maine, they look at, if there's adverse experience, the COLA is modified to a certain degree. So we should be thoughtful about how we structure it. I guess would be my suggestion.
Yeah, I think limits on COLA instead of no COLAs.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, I think that's,
So can we agree that we want to put a little more precision on what risk sharing limits to COLAs might look like? In particular on that first and third
yeah.
sub bullets?
As a model to explore.
Yes.
I have a question. Chris, a situation like that too, is it also possible, I look a lot of times on employers do a cash bonus, why it makes sense for the employer to give the cash bonus because it doesn't go to the base. And so like the growth off the COLA doesn't happen. Is there also like in a situation like that, if there's an underfunding or something that can the pension pay out a bonus, basically like a performance bonus, so that doesn't go into the base? That also changes your actuary assumption. You need to grow your 4% off of that $2,000 increase, but I'm trying to think in my head.
Yeah. I'm sure there are systems out there that do that, but that does add some complexity to the modeling. in Philadelphia, where I came from, we didn't have an automatic COLA, but there's a provision where when the fund exceeds its assumed rate of return by some percentage, people get a bonus. And I can't say that that practice has helped accelerate the improvement of the funded ratio of the system.
I just had a question about the 50% CPI and the VSTRS program. Does anybody know the history of why the VSTRS program is 50% of CPI and state employees are 100%? And or can we look at modeling, getting everyone to 100%?
I have no idea the history of that, where it came from or why, how long it's been there or anything else. Does anybody else? Michael, do you?
It's just kind of interesting
Yeah.
to know that, you know, around this table, it's so different. It's just kind of curious to me. And I wonder if we're going to look at progressive taxation or, you know, progressive COLA, could we wrap that into the conversation and actuarial exploration?
Well, I think our treasurer might have some history on why, although she probably wasn't here when it happened, but she might have be able to find out why. Was there some kind of an agreement? We'll do this if you do this, or do you think we can ask if there is, if she does have any idea?
Certainly we can check with her or other people in the office who may have some historical context to that, and it may even involve going back to see if we could review minutes from previous board meetings and where there may have been some discussion about, but off the top of my head, I don't know who might have that historical knowledge, but we can certainly
Okay.
check.
Let's see if we can get some information. I don't know. That he knows. There are a couple people in the state that were in the legislature a number of years ago who were very involved in education, and perhaps they might have a, instead of trying to pour through minutes, they might have, I'll call one of them. But that's a good. All right, so COLA only once retired for a minimum number of years. I think that's
Or
somewhat
minimum
connected.
age, both of those.
There, yeah, there, it's connected to the next one also. That if you retire, you wouldn't get your COLA until you reach full retirement age or 67. I think that's here someplace. There's also one that you get your COLA only until you get Social Security. And then there's no more COLA. So those are all things that have come up. Yeah, Eric.
I may be mistaken, but don't the plans already capture this to some degree? So we'll be changing that. Like, I don't think you do get a COLA unless you are a normal retirement age. Isn't that correct? Yeah.
Okay, so you don't,
Right.
if you retire early,
You don't get a COLA. The COLA doesn't kick in until you reach.
normal.
That's
Okay.
my.
Yeah, I think the issue here is should that period of time be lengthened to either a fixed date or to some period of some blanket period of time, regardless of what age at which you retired. So, you know, perhaps and I'm not advocating, but, you know, like just as a hypothetical, maybe you don't get a COLA for your first 5 years in retirement, or if you qualified under a rule of 87 or rule of 90 and could retire, you know, in your late 50s, you know, should that COLA begin, you know, after 12 months when you're in your late 50s or early 60s, or upon reaching some established year. I think that's the rationale behind these suggestions and why it's different from the current practice.
Okay, so kind of all three of those kind of fit together in a category about when you would get a COLA, when you wouldn't get a COLA. Any thoughts on those?
Definitely looking at the COLA only until reaching age 67, I wouldn't support. I think that, you know, really the goal is being able to take care of our members as they age. And I think that COLA will be really important as people age. And I couldn't support that.
Yeah, I agree with that sentiment. You know, I think the idea is that, well, then social security will kick in there and there's this, you know, CPI adjustment there too, but I think as a state, we want our system to be able to provide an adequate benefit in and of itself. Social security is an important supplement, but I don't think we should say, well, we'll let, you know, we don't have to consider this after that eligibility. I think we want to make sure our COLA is adequate on its own.
I guess the question I would have is if we're looking at risk sharing amongst everyone, does that kind of eliminate some of these questions? You know, if we know if we're gonna look at some risk sharing, that you know, we're hopefully balancing that out by, you know, if we're good, we'll pay a little more. If we're not good, we'll pay a little less. I think to me, that kind of balances the remainder of those things out in my opinion. So.
I mean, all of these could have a risk sharing component. I mean, you can always add in to any of these. If you know, the pensions are funded at 80%, then this doesn't kick in, or, so, I mean, you could add risk sharing to almost any of these options, besides the ones that are identified under risk.
Any other thoughts on those?
I have a thought that's maybe a little general, but it's just in my head right now. It's not specific to COLA, but I just kind of want to put out into the room the perspective that pensions are kind of deferred payment, so that, like, as a public employee, people are taking salaries that are generally lower with the promise of a pension as a deferred payment. And so if we're talking about not having COLA, you know, that in a sense is saying it's taking away from the money that was expected, you know, that people have said, okay, I'll do this valuable public service work in the promise that I'll be taken care of. So I personally feel really strongly that it's important to do that taking care of. We know that, but I'm just saying it again.
So do we have more thoughts on those three, on tying them to getting rid of them, leaving them, or tying them to, in the same way we did the ones above, tying them to a risk sharing model?
I'm in favor of getting rid of them.
I agree.
Striking them off
Oh, these, that's what, I assumed that's what you meant. Get rid of them off the page. That's what you meant, right?
That is what I meant.
That's what I thought.
You're talking about the three below the open circles?
COLA only once retired for a minimum number of years, COLA only once retired at a minimum age, COLA only until reaching age 67.
Those are the three that I was, yeah.
Is anyone in favor of looking at them in the context of the risk sharing scenarios that we sort of conceptually identified above?
Well, I have to say, at the risk of being the skunk at the garden party, that I think there is some value in looking at them in the same way that we looked at the risk sharing in the above ones, because and I don't know what it means exactly, but if you retire at age 52 or 57, I understand that you're planning on getting an increase. If you retire at age 67 and get Social Security, you have no idea if you're going to get a COLA or not. I mean, it isn't, and I understand that the idea that we at the state need to take care of our own people and can't depend on those at the federal level. But people who are on Social Security sometimes get a COLA and sometimes not. I think that for the last, I think there were 3 years in a row where there was no increase. So I don't know. I just, I think it's something worth exploring.
I think that might be addressed by looking at the floor, because the, the COLAs in these systems aren't guaranteed, they're also dependent on. So, looking at that 1%, it would be, look, that taking that floor to 0 would put it on the same par as Social Security. I guess I have a question about the COLA only once retired at minimum age. I was thinking that if someone retired based on reaching Rule of 87 or Rule of 90, that they still wouldn't receive the COLA until age 65 or 62, depending on what system they're in. Is understanding correct on that, or would meeting the rule qualify as normal retirement age?
I have to go back and look at that, Eric. I don't actually know the answer to that question, but I believe if they meet the rule of 87 or 90, that there would not be a delay in the COLA, I believe.
Yeah, and that, I would have to double check the statute as well, but that's what the chart that the treasurer's office prepared says, that it, upon reaching, for Visa's group, after reaching age 65 or age in service equal 87.
Oh, that was after.
I have a question too about how COLAs are structured. Are they all like set on like July 1 and you get it for like the next year?
If they're based on the CPI of the fiscal year, and that takes effect the following calendar year.
Okay, so but if somebody retired in November, then would they be eligible for their COLA increase in January? Or do they, because I could see like, it's not a huge one, but it's not a huge time, but this probably impacts state employees more than teachers. Because, well, I guess not, because I was thinking July 1, most teachers, I'm guessing, retire at the end of the school year. But I'm thinking maybe you have to be retired for a full 12 months before you,
Calendar year.
for a full calendar year before you can get to that COLA, because it might buy you a couple months. I know it would probably pennies, but if we're not already doing that, it might buy down something that, then you're really only losing like 3 months of a COLA. Like most people don't get raises if they've only been with an employer 90 days when everyone else gets a raise. So I don't know if there's gaming of the system.
Some of the groups,
potential to game the system.
some of the groups require you to be retired for 12 months in retirement before you get the COLA. I would need to go back and check the statute to make sure that applies to all groups. But just based on looking at the summary chart, that applies for ESER's Group C, Group D, applies to the teacher or Group C.
The classic group F also, we have people who, in the state system, who purposely retire on January 1st. So they have a full year of pension, knowing that their COLA would kick in the following January 1st.
Okay, so but if people retire October 1st, they won't get their COLA January 1?
They'd have to go until January of the following year.
Okay, so we're already doing, I was just thinking if we're not already doing that, it might be a way to
I think we're already doing it.
pull numbers down a little bit without having a huge impact.
And is it the same for teachers that they have to, because they mostly retire in July, right? Or around
Most
there?
teachers retire in July, but I have to go back and look at what the COLA language says for terms of how long they have to receive a pension before the COLA kicks in. I don't remember that, but that's it.
It'd be 6 months or a year and 6 months. All right, do we want to pursue this anymore, or we did set actuarial previously on the retirement at a minimum age. Do we?
Chris, just for this discussion, do you have at your fingertips somewhere in that ginormous binder what ages were costed out in terms of,
I
and what the impact was?
Right.
Since
Yeah.
we,
65 and 67.
Yes.
Yeah.
So this was on some slides that I presented last month. Yeah, the scenarios for VSERS, what was modeled was no COLA until a member reaches 65 years old. And again, this excluded all actives who are within 5 years of current normal retirement from the analysis. But if no COLA applied until the member reached 65, that lowered the VSERS liability by 36.3 million and the VSERS ADEC by 6.3 million. If instead of 65 years old, it was 67 years old, that lowers the liability by 48.8 million and the ADEC by 8.4 million. On the teacher side, no COLA until 65 lowers the accrued liability by 18.5 million and the ADEC by 2.6 million. And if you delay that till 67, that lowers the liability by 31.8 million and the ADEC by 4.6 million. And that is on slide 4 of my slide deck from August 17th. That's titled Impact of Various Possible Changes to Plan Design.
Thank you.
So any thoughts now that we have that additional information or are reminded of that additional information that we had a long time ago?
I mean, I guess I'm not ready to support it, but I guess if, I think it might be worth leaving on the list if we need to get there. I don't think we will, but optionality is always good if we're starting to vote on some of this stuff.
But we can cross off the minimum number of years unless we want to increase that minimum number of years from 1 to.
Well, I mean, that's the discussion, right? Like if we're gonna talk about 65 and 67, I'm assuming the unions would rather talk about minimum number of years and not have an age thing, so.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. I was gonna, I mean, because we have some actuarial modeling.
Yeah.
65, 67, and just wondering, just for the purpose of getting more information, we have more information that has to be extended to 24 months, 36 months for them.
Instead of having the date.
And I would still push to cross off COLA only until age 67.
Yeah.
Yep.
I think I agree to that.
So we could do like 24 and 36 months.
Right.
Is that,
Just to see.
yeah.
Molly?
I just had a thought that I haven't thought about the whole way through, but it's making me wonder about something like, if one of the concerns is how long people are living. You know, do we want to look at numbers that are like, what if it started right away, but it went for a maximum of X number of years, like 25 years, or, yeah, I don't know. It's just a thought. It's another possibility to look at.
It is, my thought on that is that it's probably more important to have the additional income later because you have less possibilities for to generate any other income. And also when you first retired, you had a number of working years, so you might have had some opportunity to also do some savings and investments and stuff. But when you're 90, you're probably not going to be able to get a part-time job someplace or so that was my thought on that.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. You know, I mean, the whole goal of the pension is to alleviate longevity risk, which is the risk that you outlive your money.
Right.
So if you capped, the number of years you could be in retirement, then you're going to leave people who are very old without their pension.
Oh, not retirement. I was talking about just the COLA.
The COLA.
The COLA piece. And what I was thinking about the early years is that if you're receiving COLA on the front end, then that money has opportunity to increase, right? So if you're increasing your amount, whatever, it doesn't matter. Like I said, I haven't thought it through the whole way, but it's just an option.
Other thoughts? before we jump to the last
Yeah,
couple.
just a clarifying question, especially, knowing we have to give the actuary, as much detail as possible. I think I could support looking at 24 and 36 months. But my question is, would that only pertain to people who were under 65, or would that pertain to all? So are you really trying to capture those people that are retiring earlier and deferring their COLAs a little bit, or are we trying to capture everyone?
But I think younger, so one, and I don't mean to be picking on police officers, I just happen to be related to a few of them, so I can think like their retirements, they've either been municipal cops or state, and they, I got a couple cousins who are New York State troopers and retired at like 47, and then went and got another job, so like they had this benefit. If their COLA didn't kick in for a couple years, their pension's like on top of what, they're not retired, they're still out doing other things, they're just no longer a New York State trooper. And I know cops like in my district, so I don't know how state employees versus, but like, I just know people who are like, oh, I got my 25 years in here, and if I switch and go do 10 years here, I can earn another pension that I retire on. And some people do that. And so those first couple of years, especially when they're younger, if they go on to work, it's less impactful to them because they're trying to get that second pension, or they're moving on to a second career. So that's what I think about that as like an earlier thing.
You can discount like, if you're retired over 65 and older, that's the same.
Current. I mean, there might be a way to work that, or there might be, I'm thinking even on the COLA thing, like thinking again for fairness, like if you're a senior person retiring and you're, again, go back to progressivity, your initial benefit's going to be at least X. Maybe you don't get a COLA for X amount of time, but anyone under that would still get their COLAs from the first time. So like, there are just some jobs, again, I'll go back. So hopefully the cops are now mad at me. Well, not think I'm, because their bodies just can't do it anymore, and they can't do that. And if they're going to pull down a lower amount, is it right to necessarily punish them? Is there a way to, it gets more complicated, but I think of like a commissioner retiring maybe on a pension system versus, someone who's worked in, custodial services for the state or BGS or something that, or a corrections officer who should retire probably before they're 65, if possible, because we don't want, I think there's tinkering there.
But I almost would apply the 30, 24, 36 months across the board, not just to the early retirements. I think that for some reason we have in our heads that, and I know that there are jobs where it is really crucial to retire early. I do know that. But somehow we have in our heads 65, at 65, we're doddering old fools and can't. Really, I mean, think about it. People retire at 65 and go on to have other jobs. So I would apply it across the board, because I don't think that 65 is any longer a magic number for being an old person. And I speak with experience on that.
I mean, I think fundamentally where the economy is going, you're going to actually see millennials retire earlier. There's a large shift. I mean, you're about to see the largest transition of wealth the world's ever seen generationally. And I know it's not scattered around, so there's going to be differences, but like if people even just have parents who own a home, I think when you start to see millennials, I think we saw a little bit of it with this pandemic, people retiring earlier than we thought, and that's some of our workforce crunch. I think millennials tend not to enjoy work like other generations do. I'm speaking as a millennial, like we see other broader opportunities, and I think we're going to have a different trade-off at the end of our lives than a lot of other generations, and I think you'll continue to see the trend where we choose to maybe make less money but work more reasonable hours where we do this. I think it'll be something to watch, but I think me personally, I'm looking for that earlier age, and how do I get there, and then how do I have enjoy more of what I want to do later on while I still have my health.
As much as I hope Senator Parent is right for my own personal interest, I do just want to clarify that if we lower the retirement age, that will result in an actuarial loss.
I'm not saying, but I'm just saying, I think millennials are gonna, I think it's gonna be harder to incentivize them to work beyond their years than other generations in the past.
I think that makes sense. I mean, there's a whole movement called FIRE, financial independence, retire early. It's got a lot of steam with people trying to save as much money as possible in their 20s. Really looking at their budgets, living with family, socking all that away so that they can retire
So
early.
their parents can suffer when having them live with them.
So the children can help support their parents and
Yeah,
families as
right.
much as possible.
Okay,
It's an interesting sociological question, right? Because like, for me, sitting here as someone raised by someone who lived through the Depression, millennials are one generation removed from that. And that's, that's an interesting influence. It's good to hear perspective. I'm glad we have all ages around this table. So many ages, not all.
so we can look at the 36 and 24 and 36, however we want. I still do want us to keep in our heads the no COLAs until 65 or 67. I want us to keep that there because if people are retiring at 47, chances are they're gonna, anyway.
And can I just say, just number wise, I looked at what age the earliest it would be that people could reach the rule of 90, and it's 56 if you start teaching at 21.
Mhm.
And so as a teacher, so for 87, I suppose it would be 53? No, 54 and a half.
It depends on what age you start, but yeah.
Yeah, if you start at 21, probably 54 and a half or something. I don't know, I didn't do the math on that one, but, so we don't have to worry about people retiring at 43 and being full.
Yeah. Okay,
So the last two bullets under COLAs are offer COLA as an elective option. Members accept a reduced base benefit in exchange for a guaranteed minimum or maximum COLA. Chris, can you just remind us again how you've seen that structured and?
Sure. So the intent here, I think, is to sort of offer a guaranteed COLA like an elective option when you retire, similar to a survivorship option. So if you want your spouse or your child to continue receiving your pension benefits, should you pass on before they do, you will go to the retirement office and make an election where you basically agree to accept a reduced benefit in exchange for that option, that survivorship option. This would sort of work in a similar theme and almost like an annuity, where it's like you would agree to take a reduced base benefit in exchange for having a guaranteed COLA. So that could be, for example, you agree to accept an actuarially reduced base benefit, knowing that your benefit's guaranteed to grow by 2%, pick a number, every year in retirement. So rather than making it a automatic tied to the CPI, fluctuates with the CPI every year, doing an elective option like that could lock in a rate, but in perpetuity that you can count on, but in return for a reduced base benefit.
And that would work in parallel with the existing CPI option where there's, presumably some risk would this take the place of the existing?
I think you could do either one. Obviously, the impacts would be different. But I think one of the questions is, do you want to lock in a guaranteed rate every year, or do you want to be subject to the whims of the CPI that may be higher or lower from year to year?
Yeah, that was my question, because if it's a supplemental option for an employee to say, okay, am I going to take that risk, or do I want to know every year what my benefit's going to be? I have no issue with providing employee with another option that they can evaluate.
Would they then be locked in forever with whatever they elect? There's no, it's a one and done deal.
Typically, when you make a survivorship option, and I can't speak for Vermont because I've I don't have experience retiring yet, but where I came from, it's a one-time irrevocable decision when you make your survivorship option.
Is that the way we do it?
Yes, on the option form factors, it's when, at the time of retirement, you select them, that it is what it is. You can't change it. I would just say with respect to this option, I would think the actuaries would have a hard time costing this out because it'd be hard for them to know like how many people might potentially choose this option and what it might be from a percentage perspective. And I think it would be very difficult to estimate what any potential cost savings would be surrounding this, just because we don't have any experience with this. Currently, we have, years of experience with like what percent of people choose an optional form of retirement other than the maximum, whether it's 100% survivorship, 75% survivorship, 50%, or something else. We have a lot of historical data on that. We know people's behavior. We wouldn't have any knowledge or historical behavior around this, so it'd be difficult, I think, to cost this out one way or the other.
So where do we want to go with that? Is there any interest in pursuing that as an option or just dropping it? Okay, no.
That's fine striking it.
And anybody have any other thoughts about that one? I'd like to leave it there. All right, so simple rather than compounded. Right now, it's compounded, right?
Yes.
Any thoughts on that or just leave it?
Yeah, so it's similar, this is the flip side to the discussion we were just having about delaying the COLA a little bit, and that it impacts people who, still have the ability to work and so forth. With a simple rather than compounded COLA, the impacts are going to get greater and greater over time. The spending power to actual what can be purchased for those dollars. So this would impact people more as they get further and further on retirement, presumably when they're more vulnerable. So I personally don't think this is the right way to address this issue.
Any thoughts on that? I'm seeing some heads bobbing. Does that mean you are in agreement with dropping this concept of making it simple rather than compound? Okay. Thumbs up and heads bobbing. All right.
So we are at 10:30 and the agenda suggests that we should all stand up and stretch and use the facilities and get a drink of water or coffee. So can we come back at 10:45 to continue going through these sections?